paper, all these electronics can fit inside this robot. In reality, that might be a bit of a different story. So welcome everyone, I'm Jason, the creator of Team Rocket Robotics, and step one for today's video is going to be to cut down the length of the motor wires so they're pretty much as short as possible in order to connect them to the drive ESC here. But before I do that, what I need to do is model up a little plastic tray that's going to hold a weapon ESC on top of the drive ESC. So I guess that's actually step one. Blender montage. Let's get these motor wires cut down to length. I cut off about 9 inches of wire, which may not seem like a lot, but that's going to be a couple grams. So on the topic of having everything fit, here's a little 3D printed tray for the weapon ESC, and I didn't factor in the wires coming off the ends of the ESC when I designed this little tray. So one more quick blender montage. And just like that, here's the new one. This time now, the ESC fits in there, the wires come off, and I can use a zip tie to hold it in place in the tray. And then here's just a little closer up shot of what this thing looks like, right? That sits in there. And if I've done my measurements right, this will go right on top of the drive ESC. Right on top of the drive ESC. Right. Let me show you what's going on here. It's getting hung up in the back here. The rear of the tray is just getting kind of messed up and jammed into the little motor post back here. Hey, there we go. A few minutes with some quality sprue cutters and we've got our final piece. I'm going to do some redesigning to get the actual new one to look more like this. But yeah, I cut off a whole chunk of it, clear some things out here and there. Now it fits on top of the ESC. Well, the drive ESC, and it'll hold the weapon ESC, all that fun stuff. Okay, so that is done. One more step closer. Now, if you are maybe one of the 30% or so of the people who watched the last video all the way to the end, you'll know that with this new chassis that I built that's kind of closer in spec to a real combat chassis, though PLA instead of nylon, I forgot to put a spot for my power switch in here. So before I go any further, and before I move all the components over to a more combat ready-ish chassis, let me figure out where this is going to go. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do with this piece. You can see it hiding in right there. There are little motor cradles back here that hold in the motor. I am going to remove this side of the motor cradle, which hopefully will still be decently held in place, or at least remove a good chunk of it. And then I am going to drop in the power switch right down in there, and that should then give me a little bit of space in this pocket here for the battery connectors. So I'm going to model that up in Blender. I'm going to print out a combat-ready chassis, and we'll get all these pieces moved over till it'll be something pretty close to the final chassis. So the new chassis with the power switch mount is done. Let's move all the components from our test chassis over to this one. But I'm only going to move ones that are done and ready to be assembled because there's going to be some more work I got to do with the internal components. Okay, we got some of the components in. Now I want to talk a little bit about the receiver, actually receiver's over here, and the battery, and how I'm going to hold those things in the robot. Up until this point, I'm using zip ties to hold down the battery and the receiver, and well, that's not really optimal. You can do it, but it's, and let's face it, they have their place. But what is a better option for something that's going to be taken in and out like the battery is I made some custom TPU 95 mounts. So that's going to go down here. And because it's a little bit smaller than it needs to be, it'll act as a very tight wrap to hold the battery in place. The battery's in place. Now it's time to start moving over the electronics and getting rid of these little development blocks that I had in here that are big and heavy, and getting some things soldered together. So the electronics are in the robot and there's no magic smoke, so we're off to a good start. Before I continue on with the electronics process though, I want to get the standoffs, which are going to let me screw the lid down to the robot in place. With those in place, I do need to make a few minor changes to the lid of the robot to factor in the spot for the switch. And also there's going to be a bunch of wires over here where the top half of this motor clamp should be. So I'm just going to take that all out of the design. For this robot, I'm going to try to use the Spectrum AR20 receiver. I say try because you'll notice there's something missing off of it. It's got no antenna. This is an intentional design feature of this particular receiver. Hopefully it works well under combat robot conditions, because not having an antenna flying around inside the robot is a really good thing. Just one more note about this robot in general is that this being a kind of a first Antweight robot, it's not a super optimized Antweight robot. For those of you who've seen other builds, you probably noticed people often remove the plastic casing off the particular receiver, or they use different ESCs. That's awesome, and at some point if you really want to get hyper competitive, you probably go down that route. But for your first robot, just try to work with what you have off the shelf with as little modifications as possible. Every modification you have to make to something is going to make your life more difficult down the road. Before I take this guy off for a drive test, I want to point out one thing in case you wondered. I trashed one of the bearings in this wheel up here during a poor disassembly, and that's why it does this. I'll fix it at some point. I just don't have a replacement bearing right at the moment. If you're not sure if your receiver is hooked up correct or not, this is how you find out. So with the drive test turning out great right there, there's two things left I want to do today. One is going to be to hit the heat shrink tubing with the heat gun so that I actually don't have a short circuit. I should have done that before the test, but I kind of forgot. Let's do that first. For the second part, I'm going to close the robot up. We'll put it on the scale, and I'll kind of give you an update of how I keep track of weight from this point onward. 311 grams. Let me jump over to my spreadsheet, and I'll show you how I figure out the weight of the robot going forward from this point. So the short answer here is I'm going to create a second column of all the entries I've made so far for calculating the weight of the robot. And I'm going to add 2 rows at the very bottom. One is going to be the current measured weight, and the second new row is going to be like an offset value, because there are still development parts on the robot, so I need to have a way to basically adjust the measured weight to calculate for the fact that some parts of the robot are still in development. Then what I do for all the individual components that are already in the robot and part of the measured total, I remove them from the math. Therefore, I know what the current weight of the robot is, plus all remaining components that have yet to be added. I can see if I'm still on target for my total weight. Well, as you can see there, I've currently got an estimate of about 430 grams out of about 450-ish for this robot in its final form. But I'm kind of missing the whole drive system of the weapon right now. So that could be an issue. We'll see how things go. But as you can see there, that's how I kind of keep track of the robot from this point on in terms of weight. And if you do like these kind of things, I think I've got 3 more videos coming up in this series. So hit that like button and subscribe to get those, because we got to build the armor around the robot, the business end here with the weapon, and of course then one final video to put all the production stuff together and talk a little bit about spare parts. And from there, I don't know, we'll probably see some fights with the guy in the not too distant future. I got the box in the basement, and I've got a friend who's got a kit that I would love to fight a few times, but that probably will be a few months down the road as things hopefully get a little bit more back to normal around here. But with that, thank you guys all for watching. Once again, I'm Jason, the creator of Team Rocket Robotics and the Tabletop Battlefield, so have a great week.